All right, testing, testing. It looks like we are live. Hello, hello, and welcome to Geek Out session number 13. Today we are going to be doing a book discussion of Dungeon Madness, The Divine Dungeon Book 2 by Dakota Krout. I have my co-host Peter and our good friend John joining us to discuss this book. Um, but yeah, before we get into that, what a week, guys. How are you doing?
I'm here. It's been an extremely long week, but this is something I enjoy, and I'm glad I could make it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
How are you doing?
Same thing here. Just doing my thing. Trying to keep my hands nice and
Yes,
clean as well as
yes,
everything else. So
yes,
last thing we need is more spreadage of what's going on, the coronavirus.
yes.
So
Um, don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, anybody who's seen the news impacting people everywhere. So yeah, another, that it's kind of ironic with this book, right? Before we get too far, spoiler warning ahead. If you have not read this book and you want to read it without any spoilers, this is your opportunity to abort. Going forward, we're going to be getting into the nitty gritty of this book and Dungeon Madness, right? Let's just start with the title. Um, I felt like in Dungeonborn, early on in the book, the first read through, I kind of thought I knew what the title meant, and then we got to the end of book one, right? Dungeon Madness.
that's when you really found
Yeah.
out.
And so, on that note, Dakota does a good job of like kind of hinting
Mm-hmm.
at it, and then at the end, it all comes together. Because, like, when Cal first starts doing things and he makes his first monster, it's considered Dungeon
Right.
Born. But then when we get to the end, after the main character dies, it's like, oh, and
Right.
that. So,
So,
Not to mention the was it the fourth wall moments where it's like, oh, Dungeonborn would be a great title for a book.
or that's for
Oh, is
this
that for
one.
this one? Yeah.
There's a lot of Easter eggs that I enjoy
Mm-hmm.
throughout it. Um, Keeping with theme here, main character dies, story's over. Not really. Main character dies a little bit inside. He loses a piece of his soul. So,
Yeah.
yep.
and then other main character almost dies. So yeah, Dale had an opportunity to die, but then Cal saves him yet
He
again.
he had several
Yep.
opportunities to die this book. If you really stop and think about it. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And for me, it's each time it's like, dang. All right, come on.
Right, right.
Next time, let's get him.
Some
Let's get him.
people are fearful, others are rooting for it. And
Yep.
yet nobody's satisfied, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just like the second book or second movie with Lord of the Rings, where you're just like, wow, that was a great movie. Give me
Mm-hmm.
more. I know this
Mm-hmm.
isn't the end.
Yeah, I think we talked about it in the book review, but a lot of times like the second book kind of lulls a little bit, and I felt this one just hit the ground running, right? Book one, there was definitely a lot more build up. We had to get through the baby phase, but yeah, book one or book two, we pick up literally right where we left off, right? Like it's as if you turn the
Yep.
Yeah.
page. There's no time hop. There's nothing. Um,
Yep. So Dale had just died. Cal, fixed him up. They're going out of the
hmm
dungeon. Then we meet all the who is I want to say Amber starts off where she's trying to smack Hans because Hans
Oh
is the
no,
mentor of her.
Chandra, Madam Chandra, Rose's aunt.
Chandra.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say Amber's definitely Amber's the
Hmm.
portal person.
Oh, okay. So Chandra goes to smack Hans. Rose steps in the middle and was like, pretty much, hey, he sacrificed himself so that we could slow down the
Right.
distortion cat, save us all.
Their very first dungeon crawl as a new team together. And yeah, Hans is pretty much the guild chaperone, right? How they have the party structures
Yep.
broken up. And yeah, I mean, it's grandma, right? She was worried about her baby. Um, but I think Rose was definitely right. Like he stepped in, and there are several times in this book, book two, where you're just like, dang, you really appreciate how much Hans is holding himself back, um, because he goes hardcore for a moment and really saves this group.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I can think of a number of examples, and hopefully we'll get to them later in the discussion. But before we even get into chapter one, I just wanted to kind of line up some of these story arcs. The prologue actually goes back in time. It opens up roughly 23 days ago. So you kind of get that in the back of your mind, like almost a month from the prologue, and it basically gives us the update on the necromancers, that we kind of hear a little bit about in book one, right? Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all know Cal, for whatever reason, just hates necromancers with a
yes,
passion. Absolutely
yes,
despises them.
which is good considering the fact that there's a church right there. Uh, uh, Father Richard Demon Bane or whatnot, who specializes in tackling infernal creatures. Um, but
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
so we get that story arc set up, jump into the chapter one where they basically come out of the dungeon, and we get a bit of that back and forth between Cal and Dale, where um, Dale pretty much has to think like a mob and project his thoughts at Cal, and they agree to be hush hush about it. And yeah, uh,
I mean, how would you feel if like, you got saved, you didn't know how you got saved. They pretty much like duct tape some soul stone to your organs, and then like the next time you come in, you're starting to hear voices. Like, how would you feel if like that
I,
happened to you?
I'd be questioning my sanity.
So I I don't know. I already have several different dialogues or Jiminy Crickets going through my head at any given time. So it would be a little weird,
Just
but it also, there was a lot more that came out of that. Like he only had, what, two meridians, the yin and the yang,
yeah,
or however they say it,
Yep.
open. And he just went like full hyperbolic time
yes,
chamber and got
yes.
all of them opened. Yeah, he's suffering a little bit from it, but voices in my head to go Super
He,
Saiyan.
yeah, he
Mate,
definitely gets a power up. That's for sure. And we learned later through his conversation with, I believe, Craig, that yeah, like he's lucky he wasn't conscious when that all happened because it could shatter his mind. So he
yeah,
really lucked out, and because of all that, he lost all that muscle mass. He lost uh yeah, just so much body weight to where his armor hardly fits him anymore. Not to mention the fact that it's covered in all that corruption that his body just purged. I really enjoy the river
Yeah.
scene after they finally get out of the dungeon, and he's trying to clean his armor and he can't, and that all the counselors come up, and the exchange with Father Richard, like, haven't you seen a dead man take a bath before, or something like that.
yeah.
Um,
And then he does. Isn't it also him who says, "Weren't your eyes
or
blue
brown, they're
before?"
blue now. Yeah,
Or wow,
yeah.
yeah,
So
In true Super Saiyan
yes,
fashion.
yes.
yep.
Who knows? Maybe Dakota Krout is a DBZ fan, and that's a little subtle nod to
Yep.
hashtag Turtle School.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, book one really, or I'm sorry, book two, Dungeon Madness really hits the ground running. Um, uh,
So one comment here about that after, so he's in the stream, he's cleaning up. They're like, "Oh, are you all right?" He stops, thinks about it, and he's like, "Oh, yep, just fine, and dandy,
mhm.
everything's good." But then for that a theme currently at towards the beginning of a book, he has a main character kind of get a slapped around, "Hey, wake up, get your act together." And then
Mhm.
towards the end of the book, he has a you know sit down and smell the roses, enjoy life moment.
Okay.
I finally remembered the one that I forgot for our previous stream of this. Book one, when Danny is telling Cal how to fix all the flaws and the facets in his body. He
Mhm.
kind of goes a little overboard and almost kills him. And that's when she's like laying into him and she's like, "Hey, I need you to be better." And he's like, "I'm sorry." And she's like, "Don't be sorry. We need you to be the best of the best."
Yeah.
And then towards the end of book one, we get that they finally do the inscribed opal or emerald, anyway, the glass pane that he can see up, and he gets to see the stars, and they're just sitting there staring at the stars, like thinking of how beautiful
Mhm.
it is.
Yeah.
And we get that moment for book two, right after the washing scene. Hans, pretty much, we get a small time jump. I think it's like a week.
Right.
Hans comes, scares Dale, and pretty much tells him like, "Hey, you're acting like a spoiled brat who has everyone to rule and you know dictate your life. You need to get your act together. Why do you think the whole council was there? The whole council was there to see if you were sound of mind to continue being the leader of these lands and not take it from you." And that's when he gets his kick in the butt and starts getting his act together.
Hans really is a good friend for Dale, and you see it right there. Um, because yeah, you see it throughout the book early on. A lot of people try to grab what power he has because he's literally a old sheep farmer, right? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, Hans comes in, slaps him around, and that was kind of his turning point there in the beginning, right? He starts going around inviting people to a council meeting. And it's kind of embarrassing for him at this point that he owns all this land. And we see how much power he truly has later. But yeah, he was letting all these people run the quote campsite for a while there, right?
Yeah.
And I
Um,
I feel as though this book really, like, the definition of like how this book goes for the whole entirety of this book, except for the ending part. Uh, it's all about the learning phase and essentially
mm,
uh, powering up. So I guess for DBZ, this would be the beginning of the screaming phase right here. And you're just this is the first episode of that five
I,
episode series of
I don't
Riding
even know if we're
Cell.
in the screaming phase at the beginning of the book. I think we get to it midway.
I,
Not at the beginning,
we're
but we at
still
least
like
see it.
training with King Kai, or we're in the hyperbolic time chamber from our memory stones,
I
or
yeah, I really
This
want to talk about memory
this
stones. No, we don't have to go down that path now.
well
Go
that
ahead, John.
yeah. I was about to compare it to you guys remember from Dragon Ball where it was Goku versus who was it? TN, I think.
Oh
And I
wow.
think it was that fight where like
Yeah,
way far back, like
yeah.
kid time. It was like the first time where he really fought against someone who was able to
Mm,
fight back. And I feel as though right now it's just like Dale, like at the beginning of the book, Dale essentially has all this power, all like everything in his hands, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And essentially everyone else in that town is trying to take advantage of the fact that he doesn't really know
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. And that really leads into all the different types of learning, multitasking, how to become a leader,
Yes. Yes.
learning all these math problems and everything. Like this is where he's just like, oh, it isn't just, me being up here and telling everyone
Mm-hmm.
else what to do. I mean, that's a
Mm-hmm.
part of it, but that's like a small like
Yes.
sliver of
Yeah.
what's more to come.
Yeah, and Dakota really does a good job of like slowly introducing the different elements. Uh, Kind of like Hans being like, "Hey, the whole council was there. They're about to
Mm-hmm.
dethrone you." Or when he's in the shop area and Tyler, essentially gets
Yeah.
robbed, and it's a way to add a new character. It's a way for him to put those things into perspective. And then it kind of runs it. We saw a snippet in book one with James, the
Mm-hmm.
portal mage, where they have so much power they
Right.
don't care about you. But now we're seeing him
Right.
save Tyler, which is just an ordinary shopkeeper. He brings it to the council, and he sees them saying the same things. They're like, "Oh, I don't care about walking through the mud. Just flow of essence. I can
Mm-hmm.
wash it off. Oh, I don't care about breakfast because I'm so high up, I just get it brought to me. Like none of these factors matter. And it's just nice to see someone starting from the bottom and
Mm-hmm.
working their way up.
Absolutely. And there's so many good points there that I'm losing all my thoughts. He Dakota does do a good job with like the layering of the world building, right? Like bringing in these different elements and introducing and kind of like widening your perspective. And this book alone does that so much more on the global scale, right? We really get to see these different factions of these races and kind of the interplay there with the dark elves and with the two different human factions and all that. And yeah, like John, your DBZ analogy was just so beautiful in so many ways for the fact that like you talk about um just that conflict between the characters and with Dale and Cal, and this is the first book where they can truly communicate to each other, and you see that kind of like training and that build up between them where when they start doing the question game, right? Cal was already able to learn so much from just listening to adventurers. Now he's actually able to interact with them and get access to the whole human realm, right? Because he's always learning, he's always growing, he's always trying to create these new mobs, which end up causing problems for us later. Um, but yeah, sorry, it looked like you had something to say there.
Oh, I don't know how relevant exactly it is, but MVP is the
Mm,
Wisp. The Wisp shows up in so many different
you mean Danny?
factors, and that was something I no. Yes, she
Okay.
as a character develops greatly, but the it's more Cal with being able to create and
Oh
generate
yeah,
wisps. I
the
jumping around a
jellyfish.
little bit, sorry, but the wisp is a
Mm-hmm.
part of the jellyfish. The wisp is a core structure for his new
Oh
cultivation technique.
yeah.
The wisp is actually the whole madness bit where it's a part of his soul extending and going off into different
Mm-hmm.
directions. I I enjoyed the flavor and elements that were incorporated with the
And
wisp.
that's just one of the many different like skills and learning and training and abilities both Cal and Dale
Yeah.
got in this book. And this is book two of five. Um, but yeah. There's a lot there. I want to get back to talking about how Cal got his cultivation technique, as well as just the whole training and learning process. Um, we talked a bit about in book one how, like, yes, this is a lit RPG style book and it fits in that genre, but in a lot of ways it reads more as a traditional fantasy because we don't get the pure stat dump, but there's a lot of those game mechanics. And this last time I was listening through it, it just really struck me like the memory stones, right? There's just so much there. Uh, the memory stone is basically like this flash drive in our current time where we're going to download all these skills, right, and this software and everything. You just know it, and you get the emotions, you get everything through that. But you're not able to use it without the appropriate prereqs, right? And the other game mechanics. Yeah, and the
Training.
training, you have to have grinded out so much experience, so much stats, so much time to use these abilities. There's a point later on where Dale tries to use that like mud surfing move. I don't have my notes in front of me for that part, but he wasn't able to do it because he wasn't able to work through the different mechanics and control his essence a certain way and so on and so forth. And if you think about like in a more lit RPG or like MMO mechanic, you go to the trainers, right? And what do?
I have to
You
say that.
buy a skill. Well, you know, in order to use that skill.
Where does it fit your
Yeah, yeah.
expectation? How many dots do you need before you
hmm
can apply
Or
it?
or if you work your way
Yeah.
down a skill
Uh,
tree, like you have to have, you have to know how to use the weapon in order to use a certain type of weapon combo, or so on and so forth. Like you have to have the prereqs, or the skill is meaningless. Sorry, John. What were you about to say?
you actually just said it. I was going to say a
Mm,
weapon combo. Like if you want to get to the third part of your weapon combo, which is what
mm-hmm.
hits the hardest, you have to do the first and second part of that combo before you can
Yeah,
even get to that
yeah.
point.
So like,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Pete.
And they do a good job explaining that where he takes a memory stone, and I think it's the mud
Mm,
surfing one, and it's supposed to just teach him the technique, but because he didn't know how to use his essence at all prior, it taught him a lot more.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But there was a lot of just those little things where it's like, oh, you could see it through both lenses, right? Um, this book is so user friendly to like the lit RPG genre. You don't have to know a whole lot of that dialogue because he explains it in through like fantasy like terms, right? Where it's very well laid out, and we have so many of those characters that kind of help lead us along, like Danny, Hans, um, so on and so forth.
yeah, I think it's kind of similar to the last review we did with Boba Verse Book One. Yeah, there's a lot of Star Trek
Mm,
references. I didn't see Star Trek, but I
mm-hmm.
still enjoyed it. Um, to this book, oh man, there were so many Easter eggs, or what I don't know what you'd call it for book versions, where I was like, oh yeah, Dakota, you're just gonna
Right.
slide that in there. I have
Some of
them
your
down.
favorites.
Um, yeah, some of my favorites when Cal is talking about how there was an author who came into the dungeon for
Yeah.
inspiration, and this handsome author who was named Dakota, but then he also, makes fun of himself or whatever, and he talks about how he had slow, chubby bashers,
Mm-hmm.
harassing him, this, that, and the other. So you get both sides. Um, the next one that was big for me, that I was just like, really breaking the fourth wall, are we? When Minya, the other Dungeonborn, starts talking to Dale about how he's Dungeonborn, and Dale's first thought is like, oh, I don't know what that is, but that would make a great title
Mm-hmm.
for a book. So, a little nod to that. Or, oh, I skipped over one. When Brianna comes into the pleasure house and is talking to Rose and is like, oh, hey, you're here. And then gets upset, starts throwing around mana. You get all the
Mm,
people, and Han says, oh, it's a choice between A, B, C, and D. It's what Amber, Brianna, Chunra, and Dakota. And then Dale just looks over at him and is like, Dakota? Who's Dakota? Did you just get my
yeah.
name wrong? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
He
couple little Easter eggs throughout it.
if you spend a bit of time online, some people say it's a bit much, but I don't know. I enjoy the puns, and salute to Dakota for being so bold to have fun with it in the way he did.
Well, in so much of the way that we take the information, I'm pretty bad at, the
Mm.
authors myself. So I think it was like the third one that I heard. I was like, Dakota, like, I feel like this name keeps coming up. And I was, oh, yeah, that's the guy.
Uh,
Because literally turn on the audiobook and I just click
right,
play.
right.
So,
Yeah, I'm with you. You tend to know the characters in the book more often than you actually remember like titles or authors' names. But yeah, it, lots of puns. I mean, Cal and Danny, like their half their dialogue is just straight up pun, pun, pun. Um,
yeah.
Yes. Which I mean, they upgrade from like the first book was like Cal was
hmm
like a baby, like just in a
mm.
dungeon form. This book, he's definitely upgraded to like adolescent slash like later teens. Like he's definitely back
He gets
talking a
more of the
little bit more,
puns too.
and the sarcasm, yes, like
Yeah,
it's all coming
yeah,
out, and it's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I
Which speaking about Cal, we've talked about Dale for a
sure.
little bit now. Cal has
Yes.
upgraded as well, and has moved from what was it D into the C rankings.
He does that later in the book, but even before that, he adds just so much more to his dungeon at the beginning of the book, right? Like he does get into the C rankings. I think about partway through the book. Um, but yeah, continue that thought, John.
I was going to say because of the cat that had come in, they
Mm,
essentially sealed off his dungeon for a couple weeks, and this allowed him to play slash experiment with all the different items that he's
hmm
gotten that he just didn't really have time for, able to expand a little
Yes,
bit and play around with just different ideas in
yes,
general.
yes. I really enjoyed those first couple early chapters where he's going through the upgrades, because you get more of that lore and world building from Danny. We get a lot more details about how like essence works, loose versus what was the other type? Bound essence. Um,
Yeah.
we get to learn more about the different like essence types between infernal, water, and mixing of all those when he goes through and creates the cat mobs, and even down to just like talking about the different mob types and how like initially Danny's really hesitant about using the cats after the experience with the distortion cat, right? Because like they came pretty close, that was our big climax
Yeah.
of book one was this distortion cat. While they had the dungeon shut down, they're like building additional defenses in case there's another outbreak. And while we're going through all that, he's like, well, the bunnies, they're prey animals. They pretty much have to rile them up to get them to fight. And the cats, they're predators. They have those natural hunting instincts. And we get to see a lot more of those mobs all the way up until like the wisp jellyfish and the advantages there of just kind of having a puppet that they can control, right? Um,
Yeah. Well, and another part that I enjoyed, so Cal is saying, "Hey, let's make the cats our protectors so we can get
mhm.
over them." And then later in the book, Danny plays the other side of it because with the initial cats, Danny's like, "I don't know, I don't really want this." But then, when Danny gets her garden and she gets the glade,
Yes, the mini boss, right?
yeah, she gets the mini boss. She's like, "Oh well, that's not the part you won't like. Let's add the um oh
The
wacky waving, flailing, and tentable tube guy."
the tentacles.
It's a
Yeah,
Yeah,
hilarious
and
sight.
the
I couldn't
mushrooms,
think
right?
of anything. The tentacles
hmm
added, and that's where Cal, is like, I don't know, but I like to see that kind of back and forth with the
hmm
relationship. it's not all one way,
Hmm.
compromise. You do stuff for them, they do stuff for you.
Yeah. Spoilers ahead, like end of book two is pretty traumatic, but this book we really get to see that bond develop more, right? Between Danny and Cal, and just they go through a lot together throughout this whole book. Everything, like one of the scenes that comes to mind when Danny first jumps into Snowball, just his admiration for her, and you can just uh, hear the passion he has for this companion as he watches her with Snowball, and how she can handle it so naturally and so gracefully and switch between different targets, controlling different mobs so effectively. And yeah, they definitely get close, and then we'll get to it, but the ending happens, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's where I think we were talked about Dale, we talked about Cal. For Danny, she kind of goes from that like mentor, this is how you're supposed to do
Mm-hmm.
stuff, general lore
Mm-hmm.
expert, to like, oh man, she just develops so beautifully as a
Yeah.
character. Now she's taking over different mobs, and she gets, a big highlight where she's now the third floor
Yes.
boss. Yet again, a little further, but she's the third floor boss, and you get to see you know, Hans go all out, and then her put in a good
Right.
effort, but they had fun with it.
Well, that right there, I
Yeah,
think, also is a good example of the difference in experience, right? Like, yeah, uh, she's a natural. She can handle the different combat, but Hans is like 60, 70 years old at this point and has how much combat experience, able to use his moves and
yeah,
abilities that effectively. And at that point, she's maybe what, a couple weeks um, using that. Oh no,
Yeah.
her
like I don't even know if it
oh,
was that long, but yeah, with the Goblin mob or boss, the Amazonian. Uh, Before we get too much farther, want to thank everybody who was able to join us for the live stream today. If you can, hit the like button. That really helps us out a lot. Please feel free.
Wash your
Yes,
hands
wash your hands
first.
first. It's always a good habit to wash your hands.
Yeah.
Hygiene is
Yeah.
very important if you haven't been watching the news. Uh, but yeah, wash your hands, then smash that like button. We'll kind of ramble a bit so you can get through that 20 seconds of washing your hands and saying the ABCs, or, thinking happy thoughts.
there's good ones where they do song
Yes.
incorporations now, or another good one is Naruto, where he's doing all the funky hand signs.
That's probably a pretty effective way
Laugh
to wash
because
your
it's
hands.
song.
Get your
Yeah.
fingertips and your nails to
I,
go back, each time you do the motions, and I don't even know. Anyway.
I was gonna say I haven't tried that one yet, so we'll give that a shot.
But yeah, Cal, Danny, Dale all get a lot of growth here. Uh,
So I
Yeah.
guess question, I know we're getting off track, but so favorite character for book two. Book one, everyone was like Father Richard, and I really enjoyed it. But who is your favorite character, John, for book two?
Um, man, I had a lot of great characters that like really came out and stood out to me. Um, I'm actually just gonna go have to say Danny is my favorite character in this
okay.
book.
She
Uh,
development.
just yeah, just with the like the final fight, like what she's able to do for the
Yes.
group, and by group I mean Cal, and how she interacts with everyone, and just it's like how she improved from the first book into the second book. It was just a great character development, and I enjoyed it so
Yes.
much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, I'm
Okay.
I'm gonna go with Tom. For book two. I just enjoy his humor so much. And
No,
did I steal yours?
that was
Uh,
mine. Anyway, you go
okay.
with Tom. He's got a good
Okay.
sense
Yeah,
of
he has
humor.
a good sense of humor, and the fact that just watching the relationships build between the party, and we're kind of seeing everybody up and coming and realizing, like Dale's a noble and a baron, just like all this stuff. um, and then when he gets that revelation later, um, that Tom is a prince, and then just going back through and looking at all those moments and everything, and just uh, Tom's approval. I need to find the quote because I want to read it off. Um, you go ahead,
Oh,
Pete.
Tom.
I want to do like my favorite Tom
That
period.
was one of the simple things because in book one, I think we technically knew that he was a noble, but it was so like subtle and
Mm-hmm.
glanced over, and we didn't see a lot of him. Um, yeah, I think it was with this whole intro. I have the name of my father and my father's father. I am blah blah blah
Right,
Tom, and it's like all that built up for Tom, and I was more caught up on how it was said. But I'm pretty sure we knew he was a noble, but it doesn't really sink in until he's talking to the other nobles who came
right,
over, and he has a comment. Oh, I think you'd like my friend Tom. Oh, the only Tom I know is a giant red-haired barbarian. And then it's like, oh, we've got him training with Hans. Hans has his own complications with
right.
nobles. Um, I was gonna also say Tom for my favorite
Yeah.
character. There's a lot of good character development throughout the book, but I feel he's relatable in a sense that I have communication barriers where I am often very
Mm,
serious, and then I have that dry
yes.
humor, and people can't tell if I'm serious. So that is kind of what I got. And then, you know, yeah, he's kind of the underdog right now. Yeah, he's still a main front line fighter, but he's the lowest
Mm-hmm.
cultivation rank. He's currently lost an
Mm-hmm.
arm. He got jacked up through his break or meridian. No, breaking into the D
Right,
ranks.
I believe it was D
right.
ranks. Yeah.
He
Yeah, he got messed up for into the D ranks,
he had a
and
lot of extra corruption, right? And that's where we learn more about how kind of the essence that you cultivate with impacts, not only like the healing that they talk about in book one, but also just kind of your internal essence and how you feel. And that's why it's like the heat off a forge. I think he compared it to the worst heartburn imaginable.
that's I was confused because there's two separate moments there. The one I'm talking about, they're in the dungeon. They had Evan, and they were doing mining stuff. They're
Mm-hmm.
cultivating, and then he goes into a breakthrough into the next rank. Um, and with that breakthrough, they end up the goblins chop off his arm to get the warhammer, and then his body's trying to purge that foreign object.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then also when he opens a meridian with oh, can't remember the guy's name. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So Tom was my favorite. A lot of good character developments, but
I feel as though as a side character, I think he received some of the most attention out of anyone else. So I think his character development really
That,
improved from where it was
full
at.
full
I felt like it was fairly balanced. Like we got to see a lot of Rose and the banter with Hans, and we got to see Adam being like, "Wait, Father Richard, Demon Bane or
yeah.
whatever goes on Father Richard's title, who was
That build
trained
up.
Kier Nolson and this, that,
Yeah.
and the other, and
I
then oh, who else?
you have a point,
Sorry,
Pete, but I agree with John. I think Tom out of like his party did get a little bit more spotlight than some of the other characters. And full disclosure, both Pete and I have made it through the series. John is a fresh new read, and I just want to like shout out that observation moving forward because yeah, he hopefully this isn't ruining too much for other people, but he's a big character, right? He's a prince. Um, and yeah, important role. Um, I can't find the quote, but I agree. Tom has a lot of dry humor. I really enjoy when he goes on his rant, really talking Dale up and said, in my kingdom or whatever, he's finally a man. Just that whole build up, he has this ability to just like deliver the most epic compliments. Um, and yeah, his relationship with Hans, who is also one of my favorite characters, is cute in a way. The mentor and
Yeah.
trainee go team hot stuff, I think is what they were referred to at one point.
Oh yeah, they're trying to go down to the next
Yes.
level, and there's 3 votes for fire, and he's like, "Oh yeah, go team hot stuff." And Tom's like, "Oh, if you mean the fire of which we tempers our soul as we bathe in the blood of our enemies or
Yes,
something."
yes,
Uh,
I'm just like,
truly barbarian and
yeah.
epic. Um, uh, good stuff. So we kind of got off the beaten path there. Uh,
It's like I don't even know where
yeah,
we're
yeah,
at
yeah.
anymore.
We went down a couple rabbit holes. Um, a
I
couple important points that happen earlier in the book that really impact the rest of it is when they have that council meeting, which happens pretty early on. We start to
Mhm.
see a lot more of the dark elves, right? They're officially there. Um, the princess
Yes.
didn't get an invite, but during his first initial agreement with her in book one, she was he agreed to a seat for her on the council, right? And Dale goes through that whole meeting, and when all the bigwigs who were his allies and his friends, are sitting there kind of dismissing all these little issues about security, sanitation, safety, food. I think that Peter was talking about earlier with them. Uh, the Dark Elves show up and they're like, "Well, we can help." And in a lot of ways, it's almost too good to be true. And looking back this last time I read the book, like the Dark Elves do a lot of good, but they're also getting a lot out of this relationship, and they have a lot to win by getting on Dale's good side. And because of that relationship, um, go down that rabbit hole later, pointing out all the benefits and all the good things that come of having um, I believe he's a duke officially with the Dark Elves, right? And those memory stones that he gets later, that are just ridiculously OP, in a good way. But yeah, like
Yeah.
everyone's ready to give Dale, all these problems and make him pay for it. And then the Dark Elves show up, and we start to realize like he was seriously getting taken advantage of. Uh, I think it was Madame Chandra that said like, "Hey, I didn't understand why you didn't have a tax for the dungeon." And in a lot of ways, like Frank really set Dale up in the beginning of book one, and like you have so much respect for some of these guys like Frank, where he did a lot right by Dale, but he didn't seem to bring that up as he was telling about his incomes and all this stuff for the dungeon. He didn't like set him up or help him out there. He was about ready to just say, give me some of the land rights, right? So you get to see a bit of the the human or whatnot in some of these characters, but the taxes that he imposes becomes a big part of this book, right? Um, he ends up getting like a 15% tax on the dungeon, and then I think the guild takes 25% um, of all guild.
of
Of
what's collected.
whatever comes
Yeah,
out of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And after that gets set up, the next day we meet the clerk, who basically is just being completely, trying to think of the right word here. Yeah,
Disrespectful.
yeah, definitely. And just like kind of brushes it off, talks about the landowner wants to throw a party or something like that. Um, GL Frank is not even referred to him as guild leader, which, he made a point to tell everybody like, hey, when you're not when you're talking to people outside, like I'm guild leader. When it's just us, it's Frank. But the flippant tone and everything. Um, and then Dale, go ahead.
Well, on that note, that character and her kind of story arc or whatever is just weird to me because, like, yeah, she seems like a snobby teen who's like, oh, I don't really care. I'm just here for the money, whatever, at the
Hmm.
beginning. And then later, she's the one who gets people together to try and kill
Yes.
Dale, where they're like, hey, you know, now we have to do 10 times as many runs to be able to
Right.
retire. And it's just weird because she has like that personality swap where she's being interviewed or whatever, Detective
Hmm.
Cole, and she says, "Oh, if you are what you eat, I'm an innocent man." And she's, just that whole scenario where, well, what is she? What is really wrong?
She
Like
deteriorates
there's a
over
lot more
time,
behind the
right? Like
scenes.
every interaction you have with her, her mental state is further deteriorating up until the point after, we could talk. I want to talk through Dale's whole ordeal with that, but at the very end for her, like she's essentially a beast, right? Because of the mushrooms and everything. Um,
Yeah, yeah, more
so
insane
yeah,
because of
Cal
that.
and Dale, or no, Cal and Danny just talk about how like they're super impressed with how strong she is for even being like a F rank 5 or something really low. She's holding her own until like a group of adventurers finally like turn on her and kill her. Um, but yeah, do you have something to say with that, John?
I was gonna say that was before she turned on them,
Right,
so or that was after
right.
she did
It
that.
wasn't unprovoked. She attacked them, absolutely. Um, but yeah, he basically gets his jaw busted right away in um, that surprise
So
attack.
I can't order them
Yeah, so he
land,
can't tell him to get off his land, and they throw him in there, and um, Cal is completely ready to
which
kill him off, right?
yeah. And so that brings up a couple different lines of thought there. That is a changing point for Dale because he went from full plate mail,
Mm-hmm.
giant,
Mm-hmm.
mace, all that to losing everything. And Cal hooks him up with a battle gauntlet because he's trying to weaponize more utility runes, which I thought was pretty cool. Makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense to
Yep.
me. Um,
Fisticuffs.
and then, we get that whole interaction with Brianna, the dark elf, where she's like, "Oh, is it that kind of visit?" And he's like going off on other stuff, and he's like, "What? What do you mean?" She's like, "Oh, you're in a state of undress." He's like,
Uh,
"How about those guys?"
right, right.
You know, uh, um, I lost other thought.
It really is a changing point for Dale. The weapon is OP. I find it hilarious later on when he goes back after all that to get his memory stones. Oh, oh, you got something?
So which brings up the dimensional bag, which is just a huge expansion for Cal because we get to see something with
Mm-hmm.
mana, which is the next tier up for B rank
Mm-hmm.
mages, and he's wondering why it's happening the way it's happening. Danny's like, "Oh, it's thought to be that they only use mana because they don't have access to all the different
Mm-hmm.
types, and because Cal does have access to all the different types, he's able to recreate it. And that for me was a huge thing. And just something as simple as a dimensional bag, which we all take for granted from our
Right.
MMO days, it's just get a bigger one, get more slots. But he turns that bag into several different things that A, save his life, B, save everybody else's life, and does a lot moving forward because he turns it into the
Mm-hmm.
portals, you know, a
Instead
a
of having
portal that
stairs.
contains a portal that's split into two, and then he also saves his butt or bacon from when mages die inside him at the end battle, and he directs it all into a dimensional bag.
Right.
And otherwise it would have been too much for him to handle.
They both get a lot out of that deal, right? When he could have just
Yeah,
eaten Dale, and called it a day. Uh, they they both win, right? And because of that, they each grow stronger. It's as much as it's an arms race against them, and they're fighting against each other in so many ways. They grow stronger together. Uh, Dale supplying him with
Yeah.
information through the questions and the items. Though later on he gets Minya, who becomes his new favorite dungeon born, and she's just an interesting character.
100%
Yeah,
loyalty.
yeah, yeah. She's a fanatic. Um, has she started a faith in his name in book two yet? I might.
No.
Uh, so we get a snippet. Dale's pretty much like, "Hey, I'll bring you up on murder or whatever if you continue to have your cult or try to feed people to the
Mm,
dungeon." So we only get a
yeah.
snippet.
Well, she's absolutely loyal. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, his new fighting style I think is a lot of fun, which they kind of hinted at that a little bit in book one, right? They were just trying to build up his strength and his muscles, um, but then he just had to
Yeah.
dodge anyway. They talk about his armor, which I don't know if he completely had it paid off yet or not, but before discount,
Huh.
it was appraised at 3,000 gold. So he went from a real high coming out of the dungeon crawl um, there earlier in the book, finally making some money, selling some items, and then completely wiped out. Um, his teammates pull together and buy him like some patchwork armor, and I couldn't help but think back to the MMO days where we're all just wearing whatever we can
Yep.
find, and
It's like
Before you tap out and start farming your
exactly,
gear. Yeah.
exactly,
I look dumb as
yeah,
really
yeah.
dumb.
He went,
Hey, I think they're a lot better now where you can like add colors
mm,
and change the display a different set and
what?
whatever. But also with that development and him doing a different fighting style, that's where the Dark Elves come back again, and we get that interplay where everyone's saying, "Oh well, are you going to be changing your fighting style?" And they're like, "Oh, go talk to Craig." And then Brianna steps in
Yes,
and it's like, "Well, you are noble. You
yes,
could get, the Dark Elves fighting style." And Hans is like, "Do that one. Damn it,
right,
Dale, do it."
right.
It's like if
Just
Craig's at 50%, fighting style that way, it's like they're 100%. Like you need
Yes,
to
there
do
was
that.
no doubt. He was going to be the first human ever to learn it, right? Like that alone for people who are known for being the best assassins out there. And the only thing was it was at least a 5 year commitment, I think, 10 years of training without the memory stones. So again, you get to see that yes, having the skill set is one thing, but you need to practice and practice and practice. And
Yeah.
man, I just enjoy the relationship between his trainer um, with the Moon Elves and just it's some of my favorite chapters there. We don't get a whole lot of that, I think, in book two, but later on in the series we
no.
do. Um, but yeah,
They kind of gloss over it in the second
okay.
book. They're like, oh, like he's training that kind of thing, but they don't really go into like finite detail
I
about
must
what's
be
going
thinking
on.
of book three then, because we get to see what kind of training he has to go through. Um, but yeah, once again, Dark Elves come in to save his banking and
Say the
boost
day.
up. Like he lucked out with that Silverwood tree, um, through and
Yeah.
through, because that's why they're there. This is their okay, I can't remember which book this is. Might be minor spoiler, but this is like their only silverwood tree for their race, for the Dark Elves. So like they were having to
That's discussed
okay,
in
so
book
they
one.
they had to basically negotiate with the other elven kingdoms to get the nectar or whatever they needed for fertility. And yeah, so they're just constantly there. He you stop and think about where Dale would be um, if he didn't have the Dark Elves by the end of book two. It's like he got the guards, He got like the city put in order. He got like the sanitation stuff all put together for his city. Again, the guards save his bacon more than once, especially with that
Yep.
conflict with the nobles, right? Like, not
Oh
as
man,
only is he an honorary baron with the Phoenix and Lion Kingdom, but he's a duke with the Dark Elves, so he gets some of that natural immunity from that with the other kingdoms, along with a bunch of other benefits. He doesn't get like inheritance or anything like that, but
No.
uh, yeah, the fighting style, the natural immunity, it just yeah. Have we talked about how
yeah.
much
I
he lucked out with the Dark Elves? Not
Not enough.
enough.
No. Don't forget about the dwarves.
Yes.
Dwarves got introduced in this
Thank
book, and
uh,
they helped build some
yes.
walls, which, when you think of dwarves, you think of fortresses and everything.
A wall
So,
named Cliff. I mean,
yes.
like again, the puns, the puns. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Continue on, John.
I was going to say, definitely having them come in, building that wall, aka cliff, right next to a
Right.
cliff on the
Yeah.
mountain, um, really comes in handy. Like when the end of the book starts showing its true
Mm-hmm.
colors.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, you get to see into a little bit of what another race would potentially be in that series
We
or in this
yeah, we
series.
we really get a lot more of the whole world perspective, right? Introduced to these different factions, these different races. It feels like an epic fantasy in so many ways. We also get introduced to a number of different internal factions, right? Like the whole reason why the dwarves are there is because there was some conflict with the king and their princes. So again, we got more nobility in this little rural Mountaindale, and then there's also some of the more less reputable factions, like when we get introduced to the collective after the dungeon opens back up, and you just get to see just how cutthroat they are, right? Um,
Yep.
so a couple comments on that. You're talking about how much the dark elves are
hmm
getting out of everything, but I think a lot of it is cultural or race. Because Father
hmm
Richard, Chandra, um, Frank, they're all human, so they're all trying to manipulate that or Dale in their own ways. But then the dark elves are like, "Oh, we don't need your money. Oh,
hmm
we're gonna do this, this, and this." And at first it seemed like they were taking more advantage of him, but then when the dwarfs come in, they're like, "Hey, we don't want much. We just want land to set
Right.
up a orphanage, and we'll build your wall, and we're just happy that you're giving anyone an opportunity."
Yeah, he's his reputation, you get to see it throughout the first couple books, depending on where people are at. He has a pretty poor reputation with some, but then, for Dale's sake, it's kind of nice to hear, at least in the wider reaches that like the dwarves heard that he'd give them a fair shakedown. Um, that's a big difference than the gossip that like Madame Tundra heard. And yeah, there's more than just money to some of those guys, right? We see a lot of the human factions. It's very money driven. But you're right, it's different cultures, it's different whatever. Like, what is money to the Dark Elves? They say it's pretty much meaningless, right? Like having a nice, safe place to live and grow in this ever changing world where we get to see um, how tough it is out there, right? Especially towards the end as we get closer to the climax. That Spotterton got knocked out. Like we get the prologue of the necromancers and everything, and we know that they're out there and that they go out to start hunting nearly a month before the start of the book. And the book itself, we have a couple minor jumps, but it goes on for a good several months, right? So it's
I believe
just
so. The
go ahead.
thing for the thing for me that he does so well explaining everything, but there are a lot of subtle moments where, the prologue is just the necromancers, and then I really dislike
Mm,
Nick, the guy leader of the collective. Anyway, we get kind of like two different sides of things that are happening and coming together because one, people are just being killed off, the bodies are
hmm
gone, speculation into necromancers, and then on the other side, Spotterton is gone, and they later find out that they took that secretary lady who got infected by the spores, and they portaled her over to Spotterton, and then we get to see that at the
hmm
end of the book, where now they're a horde of infected coming through, and so there's a lot of different
Yeah,
elements that just kind of subtly get
yeah,
talked about,
yeah.
um, that I can't wait to see expand.
Again,
Another random thing that I could blow up, could be big, or could be absolutely nothing when Cal's developing the portal systems and he's trying
mm,
them, and one of the goblins goes in and never comes back.
oh yeah. Hmm.
It's only
You
one
never know.
goblin, so I can't really replicate. But if somehow that goblin started up his own race, because they talk about the
Oh
differences, and
yeah.
Rose has a moment. So if this is how goblins really were, they'd be accepted as a sentient race. But that goblin just disappears. We don't know where he went.
It's it
Maybe he has his own side quest.
it no,
Anyway,
Okay.
it's certainly something to think about. Um, and yeah, you're right. He just brushes over the top on a lot of those different things that he go through and expand out. We haven't even gone down the rabbit hole on the goblins and how we're going from we started off with mushrooms, then we went to bunnies, then we went to like crazy impressive cats, which we haven't even talked about. Like all the differences of the essence and how those different abilities play out in those guys. And then we go from cats to now we have the goblins, right? And he's not just taking the every average goblin, which, he talks about the mixing of the races and how like this is the example of what not to do and why half breeds or I think goblins are considered like quarter breeds. It's like gnomes, orcs,
Yeah, they're like three or
elves,
four.
humans, like
Yeah.
something like that. And they have like all the worst traits, and Cal's basically like, screw this. And he makes like a mob goblin version where he goes through and gives them all the best traits and uses,
From each
yeah,
of the
exactly,
races.
and then uses was it the memory cores or whatnot to help them transfer their thoughts?
yeah, the
Yeah.
stones.
Yep.
And that has a cool element to it as well, where he calls them delta
Mm-hmm.
memory stones, where they every time they live or at the end of the day they re-imprint their memories into the same
Mm-hmm.
stone or same memory stone, and it kind of diverges different ways.
Yeah.
You get the goblin berserker, where they've got the fire essence or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and they develop differently. And then at a time, he takes them away, and Bob's, really sad about it because Bob's a shaman, which that was a whole, funny
Another
interview.
naming convention there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I like it. Like the humor and the puns and everything. Um, they're subtle and they're tastefully done. Like, yeah, everybody has their own um preference on some of that stuff, but like Dakota does some fun little subtle nods, subtle puns in there. Um, but yeah, but yeah. I
Are you guys ready to start talking about the end of the
um
book here?
I want to
yeah.
start talking about the end of the book, but I need to take a 2 minute intermission. Um, I don't know if you guys need a 2 minute intermission. I need to grab another drink, or if you want to wrap up everything and then we jump into it as far as the first part of the book. Are you guys ready to talk?
Uh, let's
part.
Pete and
Okay,
I
okay.
can wrap things up real quick if you
Yeah,
want to
me
head
too.
out. All right. So I think something that we kind of failed to talk about real quick is the uh, how the goblins came to be in the cave in the first place, and we kind of hit places here and there. But I think essentially what would happen was Kyle had been experimenting with the parasite, those tentacles,
Hmm.
applied it to the glade plant, and then essentially, sprayed, once it got down to like a certain health, sprayed all the spores, which had that same parasitic effect that the cat had initially, sprayed it on, what was it, the water and the woman. Uh,
Or no, those are two separate things. After the cat incident, the town blocked off the entrance, and he wasn't getting any essence in. He was
oh,
digging
yeah. He was
down.
digging down. Yeah,
Then
yeah.
he found the river, and that's when Danny gets a little extra lore bit, and she's like, "Oh, I just said loose essence for the air, and you just went with it." And she talks about how if you add in some dungeon essence into the water, it will travel downstream. They'll get addicted and they'll come back.
Oh, yeah. That's how you get the goblins.
But then at the end, or towards the end of the book, when the horde of infected are coming back, they end up traveling and following the stream because that's their scent or whatever that they're following back.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah, it's. But yeah, I could see how it's almost the same thing because that's where the writer or whatnot that's trying to warn everyone coming back. He ends up losing them when it goes up a waterfall, and he goes up the side of the path of the mountain, and all the infected are just like trying to still get up the waterfall kind of deal until one of them starts going up the path.
Yeah. In true zombie fashion.
Yep.
uh, but before, while we wait for Carl to get back, uh, if you haven't read this book yet, the ending of this book pretty much covers, what was it, the last fifth or sixth of the whole book itself. And it was a giant fight from beginning to end, starting off with like you get to see a lot of uh, the powerhouses that come out first because they're the first ones to arrive. A lot faster, a lot more powerful, and then all of a sudden, you see all these uh, not necessarily nobodies, but like cannon fodder comes in. All these extra bodies just start piling in. You're like I've killed like 200 of them, and I don't even see an end to the streams of infected here.
Well, and what I enjoyed about that, you've got Dale, who the first guy comes up and he's like, "Oh, oh no, there's monsters, there's this, there's that," and everybody, yet again, all his council just blow it off, and they're like, "Dale, really, monsters? You would think giant horde bunnies would gather more attention. No, there's monsters everywhere. Like, come on!" And they just
Right.
blow it off, and then there's another instance, and it gets serious when Frank, who is a mage and who should be immune to a disease, has that guy who came back and now he's infected. Or, the guy ruptures his center, which is illegal to
Hmm.
train and, very deadly. But that's like all these guys do. If they're 100% attack, if they can't attack, they rupture their center, which releases more spores and gets more people infected. Yeah.
Yeah. So the in a lot of books, you have all this build up, and I feel like the climax is pretty short. I think I came in on when John was talking about that, and for this book, it's a huge section. And lit RPG typically, as a rule, is a little bit more action intense, but like just this final scene of where, like all the like there's still cannon fodder, but people who didn't live or live off the dungeon were told to leave, right? So I think like I'm going from memory. The numbers are like maybe they were down to like high hundreds of people, like seven, 800. Sounds familiar of who stays to help like defend the walls before they fall back into the dungeon. And yeah, like they just dismiss it as like, oh, just monsters, monsters. But then they start hearing more and more. And what was it like? The guy from the Phoenix Kingdom was talking about they were holding their senses,
Yeah.
and so like this is literally just from his kingdom, which the mountain borders on two different human realms, is 1/6 of his population, right? So there, it's a lot, and with Spotterton, it's some big powerhouses, and we have that back and forth where they feel like they're ahead of the game, um, but then there's more, and there's more, and there's more, um, right? Like
Well,
go ahead, Pete.
that's another. So Dale the whole time is like, "Hey, let's do this," and everybody keeps blowing him
Mm,
off. And then he has that moment where he's like, "Oh, let's make them think it's their idea," and essentially asks, "Hey, how many mages were there in Spotterton?" And they're just like, "Oh, there's a lot." And then "How many have we
right,
seen?" A bare
right.
handful. And yeah,
It sinks in like, oh snap. And they start off with the walls. Thank goodness for the walls, right? But that didn't last long when you finally had was it a ruptured center at the wall that
so it really changed. A lot of people died, and it's Frank used his I can't even think of his
mm-hmm,
essence to tell everyone to
mm-hmm,
stop. And when they stop, they rupture their centers. So all the low cultivation people just straight up
right.
die and get it's kind of like a nuclear blast or whatever, just straight up die off the
Mm,
wall. Right
Yeah.
after that, that's when Brianna comes to Dale and is like, "Hey, we're gonna go protect the
right.
Silverwood tree. I'd recommend you going into the dungeon. It's the best defensible area." Which good thing they
Mm-hmm.
did because after they rupture their centers, there's all that essence in the air. And we get a little funny moment where Danny zips back in and is like, "Oh no, everybody ruptured their center. This many people died." And Cal's like, "I probably couldn't absorb that all.
Right, yeah.
I would have tried." And she just chuckles and it's like, "It's not all
He's
about you."
he's a hungry
You
little
know?
dungeon, all that wasted essence, right?
Yeah.
And mana. But then they get the
Um,
mana storm outside. Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Dark Elves once again come to save the day, and um, you know, in a lot of ways, it gets tiresome when the main characters are always overpowered or unique or et cetera, et cetera. Like, okay, they're so special. In some way, like Cal is that character, right? Because he's so unique. Um, and like another first is where uh, Danny the Wisp interacts with the Dark Elves, and they're like, "Oh wow, you're just supposed to be myth, you're just supposed to be legend," and here they are again, breaking these rules because special circumstances, etc. But yeah, they make deals with Cal. Like this book, Cal makes a lot of deals and bonds with people, and you get to see how much stronger he becomes, what he's able to learn from them, what he's able to learn from the Dark Elves, and just yeah, they get decked out, right? Mithril armor, um, a, a little
Yeah,
glimpse
yeah.
at what Cal can do when he really sets his mind to it. Same with when he's powering up his other characters, right? His goblins and everything. Um,
Which I do want to point out when stuff was hitting the fan, and he was starting to incorporate the goblins into his defensive
mm-hmm,
line. Got to see Danny enter the Amazonian goblin queen
mm-hmm,
lady. Uh, and in this final fight scene, like he got to actually have it was a weird scenario, like having a fortress inside of a cave, fighting off against all the mobs
Yeah,
here. It was a nice scenario, like you got to see
I
in your head as
I
you read
kind of got
it.
a Helm's Deep vibe. Did you? Um,
I
yeah.
did too.
So
Yeah.
like Lord of the Rings, Helm's Deep vibe, where so much of the book up until this point has been the dungeon versus the city of Mountaindale or whatnot, right? Or campsite or town or whatever establishment,
However
yeah,
it's
wherever we're
labeled.
at in the book. Um, but it just the feel goods of like you got this Helm's Deep feel where all your favorite characters are coming together, fighting alongside each other against this big, epic coronavirus. I mean, scourge. Um,
uh,
and uh, yeah, it's just the feel goods. That final battle when it's Father Richard, right? He got infected. He was one of the first guys to come down with the sickness. Um, and yeah, you talk about seeing people go all out,
So
right? Sorry, go ahead.
I enjoy the scaling of it too, because it's like it's on the
Mm-hmm.
wall. We're seeing a couple, and then it's a bunch of them rupture their centers, and now we're in the dungeon and we're still fighting, we think everything's fine, and it's like, wait a minute, how many really are there? And it just keeps getting worse
Mm-hmm.
and worse, and like we're already have our backs to the
Mm-hmm.
wall. And yeah, the dark elves are epic and they're slaughtering them, haven't stopped moving for a
Right.
moment. And then um, they finally have another solution where they find, oh man, the whole interplay with the alchemist and Cal talking
Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun.
through
Dale.
Dale, and he's
Yeah.
like, and I soiled myself. And it's like, wait a minute.
The
And
funniest
then
part for me was I was like, I need an elf's ear, and he
uh,
literally
Yes.
drops an elf's like still bleeding. He's like,
Yeah.
here you go, and he's just like, what is
How do you even
this?
explain that, right? And the alchemist
Oh my god, it was so funny.
alchemist later is like, I never want to leave this room ever. And Cal's like, that could be
He does.
arranged. So yeah.
I had a great time
Yeah,
reading
yeah,
that.
yeah,
the final battle, like you get your combat, but there's also those little breaks where you get the camaraderie. Um, everybody's like
uh,
the city, they've all been hating on him for this taxes for the longest time, so he's like the big bad guy, and then here he is like bonding with them as they're fighting, making their final stand. You had something, Pete?
Tom saves Dale from getting grabbed. Tom gets grabbed. They're playing tug of war with his
Yeah.
body, and he rips off the arm, and it just puns after
Yes.
puns.
Yes.
Oh, does anyone need a
Yep.
hand? Oh, you don't know. You shouldn't use that. You don't know where it's
Yep.
been. Uh, oh, it looks like this is getting out of
Uh,
hand, and just
so many
you
puns.
all need. So yeah, yeah, I really enjoyed that. And then we get the I really hate Nick, the
Yeah.
collective guy. Like all throughout the book, we see him in snippets. Like he's the guy who almost or got into
Mm-hmm.
floor 3 at the time, lost a
Nice.
bunch of
Mm-hmm.
people, was like whatever, and then he's about to attack our main group, and Hans is like, ahem, you
Right.
know, were you really about to attack the
Right.
guild? And then towards when they're trying to get people to go for the final, like, hey, we have a chance, we have hope, we're our backs against
Mm-hmm.
the wall, we need to apply
Mm-hmm.
this reagent across this rune. And he volunteers again. Big interplay with Father
Mm-hmm.
Richard, and he just hid in the Basher warrant,
Yeah.
and then he's the one who steals
Yeah.
Stanny. But before all that, um, the battle with Father Richard
It's intense.
and all that, it's intense, and it's weird too because that's another scene where you get to see the virus or whatever, the mushroom
Mm-hmm.
spores, how there's still a bit of Father Richard
Right.
left. There, he's like, you get that first time they lock eyes, and he's just like, Dale,
Hmm.
run. And somehow Dale survives. So obviously, Father Richard was holding
Right.
back.
Pulling some of his punches, right?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
It you really get to see the true power of some of these characters in this book, which is just such a tease for the upcoming books, right?
yeah,
Um, if it follows the pattern, like look at the climax at the end of book one, and then look at book two, the big epic fight scene, and seeing how much power there truly is out there. Um, and then yeah, just how quickly Cal has scaled, and he doesn't get all that essence outside, but he gets pretty powered up with everything dying inside of him, right?
Did, didn't he get like he went from like the bottom of the C tier till either mid or like upper C tier by just like what, a day?
Uh,
or yeah, just sort of infected
yeah,
fight.
Yeah.
Plus, so any of the mages who died, he collected all of their essence. He would be getting into a
mana.
dimensional bag.
Yeah,
So whenever he's ready,
He just dipped
yeah.
into
So
that.
there's some
yeah.
foreshadowing in the future, right? He's basically loading up a battery pack for when he's ready for it. And his accumulation up to this point has just been ridiculous. He earlier in the book he got into trouble where he pretty much just grew too fast before he was really ready to power up, and it was only Danny being there to help him pull through. Um, and then he turns around and asks like, "What do I got to do to get to the B rank?"
Yeah.
Like when he was going through the C rank, because I think it was he had was a nobleman that died during that time with the fishy.
So that was our first like epic
Yeah.
Danny moment where we had just figured out how to do the jellies. We've got this noble with the group of
Mm-hmm.
15 coming through, and she's like, "All right, well, if they're going to overwhelm us with numbers, we're going to do the
Right.
same. Add a lot more cats to floor
Right.
4." And then she jumps in, and she ends up, whichever cat bypasses armor, the flesh cat. Anyway, she
No,
gets to a flesh
yeah,
cat.
it's the Necro Cat,
Infernal. Yeah. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
just goes,
Or
yeah, the Infernal. Yeah.
Yeah, so she gets into that, bypasses the armor, ends up taking out a guy. He breaks into the next ranking, and then she goes back and she takes out a couple more people. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good fight for
Yeah.
Danny.
It really is. And yeah, we get all those feels for Danny throughout the book, and then at the end, teaming up with the adventurers, going out, and Cal really trying to talk her out of it, only to have um, her get captured,
Nick
right?
the guy.
And then the epilogue of Nick taking him to the master. Um,
Or yeah, take Danny to the
mm-hmm,
master.
mm-hmm. Um, but yeah,
Oh man, get that little snippet moment where he's like, "What? Oh, this is more than expected. I'm gonna go
right,
buy an island." I was like, he should have
right,
died. Kill him.
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
You really want that to happen to like those type of people where you're like, just wait for it. Karma's gonna come back, bite
Yeah,
him in the
or
butt.
so you hope.
Yep.
Um,
Yes.
I feel like he was the linchpin or the critical thing for like 95% of what went wrong.
yeah,
Like he was the guy who killed the infected secretary, stuffed her in a bag, gave her to the spotters. He was the guy who stole Danny. He almost attacked our main group. I guess it was a good thing that he went first, and a big group of or a big part of his group died. But like every time I heard that
yeah.
name, I was
He's definitely least favorite
Ah.
character of book two, right?
yeah,
Yes,
least favorite
yes.
character.
Um,
That
go ahead.
one moment that I don't know if it just like wasn't supposed to happen like this that irked me re-listening to it. Frank is all like, "Hey, we're holding out
Mm-hmm.
fine. You know, the end is in sight." They get that whole revelation that there's a lot more out there. Frank gets a mushroom on him, slaps it, is like, "Ow." They comment that he's becoming more aggressive, and he's like, "Oh, hey, I'll go with you." But he doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't actually go with them because we get our main group, and then we get one other guy who ends up saving
Mm-hmm.
Adam when he activates the rune and gets blown up
Mm.
and whatnot.
I remember
But
them talking
he doesn't
about
actually go with
trying to keep people down there who were stronger to help hold the line.
them.
Um,
I may have said,
I know that's
but
what the excuse they use for some of them, especially when he's trying to talk Minya down from going with him. And, Dale tells her that she's the only one that can communicate with Cal, so she has to stay there just in case. But
yeah.
yeah, they have that final special force go out to try to save the day. Um, so yeah.
And then at the end, a main character only dies on the inside when Danny is
Hmm.
taken, and uh, we got a side character souped up, Adam, who activates the rune with his celestial energy. And after all that happens, Hans is talking to him, and he's like, "Whoa, your affinity channel for celestial essence is open more than 100%, and your infernal essence or meridian has been completely ripped out." And he starts being able to read auras or
Hmm.
whatnot. And Hans jokes around, is like, "Oh, hey, maybe we should cheat at
Right.
card games."
Right.
Like that is, we got to see a little bit of it with Detectorate Cole, how he can read
Hmm.
auras, but this is a completely different
Hmm.
animal. And so yeah, he gets powered up. I'm curious to see what reading auras can do.
There, you bring up a good point, that in a lot of ways, like the world has expanded so much, like we know so much more about like this universe than we did in book one. But when it comes to like skills, primarily all we see are the combat-based skills, right? We get a little bit of it through like the judge with the reading auras or whatnot, and some other different elements there. But there's just so much that the storyline can do to kind of expand that. Um, and not to spoil it, but yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I enjoy the game like mechanics in there. Um, so some final thoughts. Any other big moments that stood out for you guys at the climax? Some favorite combat scenes.
So you talked about how we get to see all the powerhouses doing
Mm-hmm.
their thing, and to see Chandra, the plant
Mm-hmm.
mage, for her utility stuff. She makes all of her pleasure houses with the trees and makes them all look the same. But then we get that interplay where Cal's like, "Well, I hope she does something nice. She's been charging up. She's been, having her whole episode 30 minutes worth of
Right.
charging up. What's she gonna do?" And she throws out all those like seed spores, and then all of a
Yep.
sudden everyone's like stuck to each other, and there's a giant wall,
Mm-hmm.
and we got to see her power up.
It's fun to see the different
We got
magic
to see,
types.
yeah,
Yes.
see a bit of Father Richard and his
Mm-hmm.
Sonder, which is what it's heard as, which isn't the actual thing, because I'm pretty sure it'd break everyone's mind. Where he sticks Dale and Tom together, and then he turns around and sticks Dale and Hans and Tom together, and then he just sticks them all to the floor. So he's got kind of a funky magic
Mm-hmm.
type. Um, mm,
I would
and
definitely say Richard was my favorite
Yeah.
too.
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I read slash see different, I'm super into like fantasy, like superpower
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Um So when I see really interesting concepts for powers, like it definitely rings true, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Like then I attach myself to that person, and I'm like, all right, I want to follow this person because I want to know like
Right.
how they came up with that type of power.
More
Yeah.
of them in the story, please. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But instead of fighting, friends, I want to see them fighting, I don't know, Nick or
Right,
something.
right. Or
Yeah.
the necromancers. They this whole book they've just been building up in the background, right? Gathering their power.
Yep.
They now
Yeah.
have a dungeon wisp, which supposedly they needed for whatever reason. Um,
That, and then we get just that snippet of Dungeon Madness
yes.
where oh, he kind of does the oh, just kidding moment where because of the disease, Dale's like, yeah, we're gonna call it Dungeon Madness, and Minya's like, nope, that's already a thing,
Yep.
can't do that. All right, Mad Dungeon
Right,
Disease,
right.
whatever. And so it's like, is it? Is it? Is it? And then we get to the end, and you know, he says to everyone because he's been knocked out by Nick, and then Minya comes in and is like, oh, is she really gone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to talk to Cal, and he's having his "I'm going to kill you all" kind of
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so many feels throughout the end of the book, throughout the final climax. Between Danny, between Father Richard, which I think we agreed was like one of our favorite characters from book one. Um, Seeing everything just kind of like torn apart, though they can always rebuild. Um, yeah,
I had a lot of feel good moments with this book, like all the way up until like you got to follow all the characters and all the character development. The final battle really brought out like just in general, just like wow, they could work together if they really tried,
mm-hmm,
kind of deal. Finally getting towards the end, I'm like we did it, guys, we did it, and then everything just goes
right,
south, and it's just like and everything's broken
yes,
apart in like 5 seconds.
yes,
So it really makes you like when you're done with the book and you finally read the epilogue, you're like, wow, I want to read the next book just so I can see what happens to Nick. So I was like, I want to see him get ripped apart, whatever, however you
yes,
want to
yes,
imagine
please.
it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it does take us on that emotional roller coaster, and you get to that top of the feel good, and then Danny. So,
Yeah,
yeah. On that note, we're definitely going to do Dungeon or the Divine Dungeon 3 as one of our future Geek Out sessions. That,
Dungeon Calamity.
yes, yes,
Calamity.
yes.
Yes.
Um, the next one we have scheduled though for next Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, is for We Are Many, Boviverse Book 2 by Dennis E. Taylor. You could check out our previous Geek Out session with that. We currently have Dungeon Calamity, The Divine Dungeon 3 by Dakota Krout, the next one in the series, scheduled for the following week, the 29th, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern. Those are subject to change, so keep an eye on the calendar on geekonmysleeve.com. Uh, yeah, guys. Final thoughts about the book?
So many subtle moments, such great character development. What happened to that goblin?
What happened
Pretty
to
good.
that goblin? The question of the day. Let us know where you think the goblin is down in the comments below. Also, since we haven't, or maybe we have, anyway, like, comment, subscribe, etc., 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 etc. John, your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Uh, Dale's still alive, so he did kind of grow on me a little bit with the second book, but I don't know. He's still, for me, he's still annoying. Cal tried to get better of him, and then the unfortunate devastation for him and Danny getting taken from. It's very. It makes me want to read the next book and try and figure out like, all right, something bad just happened. How are they going to make it
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, all this build up for Danny becoming a epic mob
Hmm.
battling monster just to and it's gone.
And it's
And
gone.
all
So
the feel good stuff with her and Cal, right? They talk about goals and
yeah,
aspirations and plans and stuff they're going to do. Um,
bouncing ideas off each
yeah,
other
yeah.
and
And Dale is at least less of a brat, maybe. Like he's come a long way.
A little bit.
Um,
for me, he is in crunch time
yeah.
mode. He has too many different things going on. He's super powering
Hmm.
up. He doesn't have time for other
Yeah.
things. Like he's getting memory stones, he's learning more concepts, he's, actually putting his foot down and getting the um, group, listening
Hmm.
to him. He's, understanding more about himself or the dungeon
Right.
born. There's a
Right.
lot.
Yeah. There is. There certainly is. He's come a long way, and oh my goodness, just the scaling up until now. It's only book two, and there's three more of this
Yeah.
series. So like, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it continues to scale and build. The characters to continue to develop. Um, Started as a sheep farmer, now we're here, and yeah, thanks Pete, John, everybody who was able to join us for the live stream. If you want to support the channel, please look down in the links below. And we hope to see everyone next week.
Sunday, Sunday, Sunday.
Sunday.
Wash
Wash
your
your
hands.
hands. Uh,